What is not a bullet you dodged, but a huge tactical nuke you dodged? Broke my belly button overeating at a company lunch. Went from an innie to an outie. Hernia. Put off going to the doctor for a few weeks before going to see a specialist. Hernia doc said yep, it's a hernia, we're in a pandemic, we can schedule you for whenever, if you want to wait a bit there shouldn't be any problems, no hurry. I decided to get it out of the way, they had a cancellation so I scheduled for a week later. I wake up from surgery and the doc says there was a complication, they didn't get to the hernia when they were going and they noticed my appendix was about to explode so they took that out instead. Still not the tactical nuke. I asked about when they could fix the hernia, he said the appendix looked funny and was going to send it to the lab and get back to me. The lab was really backed up from the pandemic, so several weeks later I get a call from the doc. It was a really rare appendix cancer, something that happens to around 1,000 Americans a year. Not only that, but of the two kinds of appendix cancer based on lab work, I had the worst of the two. The kind that spreads everywhere really fast and cuts your lifespan down considerably even with treatment. The first kind grows slow and stays put, but every once in a while it will go into overdrive, differentiates, pokes out of the abdominal wall and spits cancer slime everywhere that turns whatever it touches into more cancer. The cutoff for it turning from good into the bad kind is 1 cm tumor. Mine has 1.5 centimeters. Under the microscope it had differentiated and they saw the cells that spit cancer slime had formed. There's really only one treatment referred to as the mother of all surgeries, which is its own bull of tactical nukes. I stew over that for a few weeks till they can get more tests scheduled. Still in pandemic so it takes a while. Go in for a barrage of scans, pokings and proddings and the scans are all clean, no signs of cancer spread. Mostly, it had just turned from the slow growing kind that stays put into the fast moving kind and hadn't had a chance to spit cancer slime outside the wall holding my appendix if I had waited just a week for the hernia surgery. Literally every day that I waited would have exponentially increased the odds of it spreading the mucin. They think they got it all when they took the appendix out. There's a few things they want to keep an eye on that they're reasonably sure is just scarring from the surgery, but they gave me an 80% chance of being cancer free. I have more scans in December to make sure. My wife dragged my butt to the dermatologist for a cyst I have had for years. While there the doc noticed a mole on my ankle that he didn't like. Turned out to be melanoma. Would have never gone if my wife didn't force me. Men. Being kept alive by their wives since forever. Yes, mine has also kept me alive. After a night of partying, a bunch of us wanted to go watch the sun come up at a local beach when we had just graduated HS. There wasn't a sober one amongst us, and one guy volunteered to drive in his minivan. A few of us said no, let's watch it from the deck, but he said he was sober enough. I just had a bad feeling and a bunch of us stayed back and slept it off at the house. We were all woken up a few hours later about 8 o'clock to phone ringing off the hook, cops, and freaking out parents. Pre-cell phone days. They were in a really bad single car rollover accident. 4 of 6 dead. No one wearing seat belts. They would have had to have taken a curve at about 160 km/h. That was a rough summer. Oh, and survivor's guilt and depression is a real thing. When driving in the Upper Peninsula in Michigan last summer, a truck full of logs flipped and barreled straight into my car. Completely demolished the car. Someone else had to come open the door for me after the fact because they were all pinned shut by logs. I walked out of there without a scratch on my body. Final destination level disaster. 24 years old. Had a pesky sore on my tongue that was really bothering me. My boyfriend's dad was a dentist, so when I was over at his house one night I asked him to take a look. He recommended I go see an oral surgeon the next day for him to check it out. The next day I decided it was feeling better, so I tried to cancel my act, but my boyfriend's dad insisted I go. I went, and the oral surgeon pretty much diagnosed it as cancer on the spot. It was aggressive, and by the time of my surgery to remove it, it had already spread to multiple lymph nodes. They ended up removing over half my tongue, followed by chemo and radiation. Given how aggressive it was, I often think that if I had put off the doctor's visit any longer I probably wouldn't have survived. I'm coming up on my 10-year anniversary in January. I was driving home from visiting my brother in Vermont when a snowstorm started. I didn't have much experience driving in serious snow and I completely lost control. car careened off the road and I was heading for a giant boulder at around 50 or 60 miles per hour. I felt time slow down and I reflected on my life for a moment and then said goodbye to my body. Suddenly, I was jolted out of it by an abrupt impact, but I could see that the boulder was still 20 or 30 feet away. When I got out of the car, I saw that I had hit a little skinny tree that I could have easily grabbed with one hand. However, it had a giant root system that lifted the car off the ground and stopped me. Car was totaled, but I was completely fine because of that little tree. There is no way I would have survived the other impact. I was engaged to someone, but then came to my senses and broke it off. 9 months later I found out she got married to someone else, then about 1 year after that she killed her husband. Oh my lord, that escalated quickly. On a road trip in college with 4 friends, we stopped halfway for a pit stop because I had explosive diarrhea and was getting more sick by the minute. The friends carried on to Vegas and left me with one of the guys who rented us a car to return home. The friends that carried on got into a rollover. 1 died, 2 will be injured for life. That friend who ditched a Vegas trip to drive you and your diarrhea back is the best friend ever, a true gold star friend. Walking to work in the winter. Halfway through a step forward under a sky bridge when an icicle taller than me, 6 feet, and probably 2 feet around at the base crashes down right in front of my nose. If my bus had been a half second earlier, if I had walked even a tiny bit faster pace, I would have been impaled from brains to balls. I was frozen in place for a minute, quietly surveying my near death. There was another pedestrian nearby who witnessed it and the wide-eyed, ashen look on his face as he stared at me confirmed just how narrowly fortunate I was that day. Impaled from brains to balls is a proper name for a black metal song. My wife and I were prepared to buy a nice riverfront property in 2019, but the owners, her dad and uncle, were dragging their feet. We had our down payment, we were approved for the mortgage, and we had even been living there paying rent. Then the river rose 30 ft/10 m and we had to evacuate. The water kept rising. The house was destroyed before we bought it, so we didn't buy it. Helpful tip for everyone out there, never buy in a floodplain or anywhere where you can't afford the flood insurance. This happened before cell phones existed. I had a long commute home and on a rare occasion my husband drove into the city to meet me. I started for home about 15 minutes before he did, on the stretch of Highway 101 that I needed to be on for about 20 miles. There was a big rig in front of me that seemed to be driving erratically. I got this weird feeling and just moved over to the next lane and accelerated past him. In my rear view mirror, I saw the big rig run over the car in front of him, flip to its side crushing the cars in the next lane, where I had just been. My husband was behind the accident and as the police were letting cars file past in single file, he saw one of the crushed cars had a red bumper. He got home a couple of hours after me and said he'd never been so happy to see my red car in the driveway, that he'd been holding his breath as he turned down our street because he really expected me to be under the big rig. Oh wow, I imagine that was the longest drive of his life after seeing that bumper. Was chatting with a woman at the bar. Nothing flirtatious, just casual banter. I told her I needed to head out and she asked if I could give her a ride. I was headed that way so it wasn't a big deal. We pull into her driveway and I can see a guy at a computer in the living room through the window. I ask who it is and she replied, "That's my husband. He is a pansy. I'll bring him outside and you scare him off. Then we can have the house all to ourselves for the night." Every alarm bell in my head was ringing and all I could think was how do I get this crazy out of my truck without a big scene, so I said sounds good. As soon as she was halfway to the door I put a gear and burned rubber. IDKY, I felt so scared reading that. It could have ended so much worse for you. For some reason my gut says the husband might have been involved too. I have some acres of woodland that I take care of with a chainsaw to keep a desirable mix of tree species and avoid overcrowding. Often when I cut through the trunk of a tree that's too close to other trees, it just leans against them rather than falling down. Then I have to make a series of angled cuts and let chunks of the trunk slide off, more or less vertically, onto the ground. Eventually, the trunk winds up vertical enough that I can push it toward a clear space and complete the process of felling the tree. Well, a couple years ago, I was getting to that point. Tree was basically vertical, a few thousand pounds of wood balance on its end, reaching 30 feet up. I made another cut, and the rest of the trunk slid down off the 3 feet or so of trunk that I'd separated it from at the base, and then it started to lean. That sucker was coming down, except it wasn't going the direction I'd planned. No big deal, just move out of the way, except I'd gotten careless and left a bunch of branches down there at my feet, and I was disturbed to find that my legs couldn't move. I was stuck rooted to that spot, which was very close indeed to the way the tree was moving. It wound up just nicking my head on its way down. Another few inches and it would have done a lot more than that. I'm always very careful to make sure the ground is cleared of branches when I do this now. My father-in-law was working on construction of a power plant and was scheduled work. Sunday was a union pipe fitter. Saturday he got a call from another company asking him to run a job much closer to his house. Think 5-minute commute versus 50. So he accepted and didn't go to the power plant job Sunday. That day there was an explosion at the plant and people in the crew he was working with wound up getting killed. Few years ago I was in a small fender bender. Someone merged into my lane, with me in it, and smashed my driver's side door and their passenger door together. I had pulled my arm in from having it hanging out the window about 15 seconds before that happened. Would have most likely had my arm ripped off. Almost wound up in the I-35W bridge collapse in Minneapolis years ago. My uncle, cousin, and I were on our way to a Twins game. We were originally planning to take the route that crossed the bridge, but last minute decided to take a more scenic route. After it happened, we were talking and we figured it probably would have been within a couple minutes of the time the bridge collapsed that we would have been on the bridge. Same thing with me. I was driving home that day, south to north. Had the option of I-35W or taking 62 into St. Paul. Chose 62. If I'd chosen 35W, and I wasn't on the bridge when it went down, I'd have been within a few minutes of it. Got home to a lot of text messages from my parents. I used to work for a drainage company, drove 5-ton trucks with the roll-off bins, used to move machine or material with them. One day, I was super tired. I pulled up to a job, tilted the bed up, got out, opened the dump gates, got back in cab, roll forward slowly. Nice dump, great. Get out of the cab, go back and close dump chutes. Oh, crap. Still a bunch of sand in there. Dumbass me unlatched the gate of the roll-off bin. About half a yard of sand still in there, and the bin was still on an angle. The door opened so fast. The latch got catapulted into my cheeks so hard it broke my orbital and knocked me to the ground. Blacked out briefly. The gate itself swung out, somehow missed me, and just had clearance over my steel toe boot. Dented the steel, scraped all the fabric off the boot. I ended up with just a small scar under my right eye, but could have easily lost my toes and a knife I'd been standing about 1 inch to the left. Do not operate heavy equipment while tired, drunk, or under the influence of drugs. Work. Do not operate heavy equipment while tired, drunk, or under the influence of drugs. Work. Machinist here. Tell that to the white collars at my shop where everyone on the floor's been doing 60-hour weeks for over a year now. We were in Italy on a school field trip. We decided to play Schweinehofen. Pig pile, dog pile. Anyways, on person is declared the pig and everyone has to jump on them. We played this on a beach at night. Just sand, no danger, right? Well, the last round we got up and realized we formed this pile next to a 1-meter metal pole sticking out of the ground. It was maybe 10 centimeters away and could have easily impaled the first 3-4 people. We didn't play that game again. The second floor of the house I was renting collapsed a month after I moved out. ETA. Apparently a water pipe sprung a leak shortly after we left. We weren't in any trouble. Probably all that dang stomping around. Signed, downstairs neighbor. Uncle Sam wanted to draft me during the Vietnam War. At the last minute during the physical I pointed to the surgical scar on my shoulder and said to the doc, I don't really trust this shoulder. Any problem? Next thing you know they take x-rays and after a bit of a wait the colonel in charge of the place said to me, I'm sorry son but I'm going to have to disqualify you. And home I went, a free man. Second one. Leaving a campus tavern on a sunny summer afternoon and walking barefoot with my friend on the warm rails of the train tracks. We commented that if a train were to come we'd feel it in the tracks the same way the original inhabitants could put an ear to the tracks and hear a train coming from miles away. Not 2 seconds after that comment the train horn sounded behind us. It was coming on at about 20-25 miles per hour and we jumped off with only a few feet to spare. Glad the engineer happened to be looking. My family has a story similar to your first one. My mother's father had double jointed shoulders and could dislocate them without any pain. During basic training for career, his shoulder popped out while he was using a gun and his friend adamantly told him to start screaming. He followed that advice and was given a cushy desk job for his dislocated shoulder so he wouldn't sue them. There was an apartment I really wanted but at the last minute I found a slightly better one. The apartment I almost moved into burned to the ground a month later. This has the makings of a good Twilight Zone episode. Miss a flight and the plane could crash too. Yesterday I was helping my fiance's dad cut some tree limbs from his yard. He was on a lift trying to cut some limbs that were dangling dangerously high over a steel propane tank. The tank itself had $1,500 worth of propane. Had he cut off a limb and it hit the tank with the largest bang I've ever heard. Propane came pouring out the top like smoke from a mortar. He struggled to get the lift down enough to jump out run for his life. We would later find out that the limb hit the gas valve and it fell straight down into the tank. If it had sparked once, it wouldn't have mattered how far we ran. We would be dead. Him, me, and my fiance who was showering inside, unaware. Now he has no gas, is out $1,500, and almost died. A big twist is that I saw him smoking up there. There's no way we should be alive, let alone good. The gas is still leaking out even after 24 hours. You might want to call someone about that. I quit a job after my boss yelled at everybody for faking being sick when one guy came in with the flu and passed it around the office. He claimed that people don't get sick by being near each other. One guy got it so bad he was hospitalized for 2 weeks. I quit with no backup in October 2019. By February 2020, his company went out of business. Met a girl online, went on one date, she seemed off. 3 months later she's on effing Entertainment Tonight for breaking up the marriage of a famous sports reporter and threatening his wife at their home. If you had dated her, she wouldn't have broken up that reporter's marriage, and he'd be on here talking about the bullet he dodged. My family and I were about to leave a store and then my mom had to pee, so we all waited for her. On the highway right in front of us, there was a nasty fatal crash that left multiple people dead. I was moving abroad to do a post-grad degree. My flight was to leave out of Nuke early morning on 9/11. A family friend who worked in the towers kept prodding me to move my flight to the afternoon and come visit him in the office so he could show me around. My parents were pressuring me to go as well since it was a good networking opportunity. I was on the fence, but decided not to since I was a poor student and didn't want to pay the cab fare from my hotel in NJ to Lower Manhattan. Our friend made it out, thankfully, and I'm guessing I would have well, but no way would I want that experience burned in my memory. Oh crap, just remembered this one. Probably the scariest thing that's ever happened to me, and at the time I had no idea. This still scares me today thinking about it. My dad worked at a church when I was elementary aged. The youth minister was fun, had all kinds of cool stuff in his office, and my brother and I liked spending time with him and playing with his Nerf guns and whatever else he had for students. But we established a tradition where on a monthly basis he would take us to a restaurant for breakfast. My brother and I thought it was awesome he paid us any attention since we were younger than the students he worked with for his job, but he still took time for us. He had a parish which we'd visited, multiple car issues in which we occasionally would have to walk somewhere, plenty of opportunities where we weren't in public. He took another job a couple years into this at a different church and was arrested shortly after for child molestation. People came forward from both before and after he was at our church, but none that I'm aware of from when he was there. So my brother and I were groomed by an experienced molester and we were clueless at the time. Nothing happened to either of us. We have no idea why, because the opportunity was there. Sometimes predators establish some people that normalize their behaviors to better hide what they do to their victims. I interviewed at a company in NH that made jams, baking mixes, lollipops, etc. for a technical job. The president, the owner's daughter, spent most of the interview dumping on their current consultant and making fun of all things, his degrees. That initially turned me off. Then, speaking with the owner, he makes it a point to take a call and tell the person on the other end, "I'll pay you when I pay you." Cash flow issues. His question about my education was, "What can your fancy degrees do for me?" Then, when I met the VP of marketing, she asks me how many recalls I've done. None. That's not what I do. Wait, what interview is this? I declined their offer. Fast forward maybe 5 years. I'm talking to a guy about doing some consulting work for him and we get in the subject of this company. He had interviewed there as well. He also got the vibe and declined. Turns out, they were planning on selling the company and were beefing it up for appearances. It also turns out, after the sale, that they had spent the previous months sending current clients to their next endeavor. They almost went to jail for their financial and business shenanigans. Would not have been happy to get caught in that mess. Back in the 80s, a friend asked me to go on a motorcycle trip to Alaska with him. I declined. He had an accident on the way, skidded several hundred yards on his head, and now has a metal plate. I would have been on that bike with him. Not me, but a family friend managed to avoid a pulse shooting where they were having a birthday party because they had gotten an intense craving for McNuggets, so he and his group went to McDonald's down the road. They left roughly 15-20 minutes before everything went down. Oh crap. We went to Thailand in 2003 for Christmas. I spent a number of years there in the early 90s as a kid, and loved it so much that we were gonna do it again the next year. Spent Christmas watching the sun come up on a beach at Phuket again. We had the tickets and everything, but because of some new fallout from an Enron adjacent scandal, my dad wasn't allowed to leave the country. He wasn't implicated, but was in the C-suite of a credit card company, and all such people were under travel advisory. Anyway, the very hotel we were gonna stay at got 100% wrecked by that tsunami, so I guess we got lucky. Yesterday I was driving and waiting for the left turn arrow to turn green. I kind of spaced out, and then realized the arrow turned green about a second ago, and took my foot off the brake. As soon as I did that, a huge pickup truck ran the red light from my left and didn't even tap the brakes. If I hadn't zoned out, the truck would have hit my door right where I was sitting in my car, and I probably wouldn't be typing this right now. I used to own a gym with a partner. I sold my half of the company and took a boring but stable government job about 3 months before the pandemic. Almost ended up working for a cold calling rehabilitation center. Seemed sketchy as heck from get. Decided against it. Months later everyone working there got booked on running an insurance fraud scheme. Came up shy of our financial goal for a wedding and decided to save again for another year. We were gonna go on an adventure and elope. Relationship fell apart in the following year. Both of us put nails in the coffin. I was the only one to acknowledge mine. She could do no wrong, and I was being gaslit pretty bad. When we split, my depression evaporated. I was able to go off my meds and realize just how deep she had her claws in me. I thank God every day we didn't get married. My mental health would have been horrendous. In 10th grade of high school I was in love with a man. Yes, a man, because was at least 21 years old. He ended up ghosting me and dating my best friend. I was devastated, to say the least. Well, fast forward a few months, my beautiful ex-best friend with green eyes and a pretty body suddenly started dressing in oversized men's clothing. She stopped participating in sports and stopped going to events. She looked tired and sad all of the time. Turns out this man was a manipulative, controlling, crazy person. He was extremely controlling of her and forbade her from talking or interacting with anyone at school, unless absolutely necessary. He got her a cell phone and made her call him in between each class, so he could be sure that she wasn't talking with friends. He knocked her up our senior year, and soon after graduation he moved her to a new town where she didn't know anyone. Basically to isolate her and further control her. I look back at that and think that could easily have been me. I was a sucker in high school and boy crazy. I know I would have fallen for his trap. When I was 16, I had a good friend whose father was a wealthy businessman of some kind. This is Chicago, and I guess his dad started screwing around with the wrong guy's woman. My friend told me it had something to do with the mob or a mobster's wife. I never knew for sure, but do know that I saw firsthand his dad get threatened, at a tennis court of all places, by two well-dressed clearly Italian men who drove up in a black Cadillac. I was sitting right there with his friend as they talked to him, and it was exactly as I imagined it would be in the movies. My friend said there was a contract on his dad. He actually said it like it was cool, and at the time, I guess I thought it was too. I was invited to go with them on a fishing trip in Lake Michigan that week. My friend, his dad's friend, and I. 2 days before the fishing trip, something happened with a member of my family and we had to go to Cincinnati for a few days. When I returned, I learned my friend's body was found floating in Lake Michigan. He was wearing a life vest. His father's friend, and the boat were never found. Police questioned me about what I knew and who I'd seen talking to his dad, but I think I was lucky that I said I couldn't describe what they looked like and didn't get wildly specific. Either way, the coolest kid I knew, Chris, was dead, and they never found his dad, the dad's friend, or the boat. It was a nice boat on a calm day on Lake Michigan, and something bad happened. Always felt I dodged getting caught up in something I wouldn't have escaped from. Going on a fishing trip when you know the mafia has a contract out on your family takes some balls. Kind of like accepting an invitation for tea from Vladimir Putin. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.